Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? This time, we're taking you to the Faroe Islands, well, back in time, actually, to January 2024.
Oh, I love the Faroe Islands. Always something interesting happening there.
You're not wrong. So, January, let's kick things off with the political landscape. We had some local elections, right?
Yeah, definitely. The minority coalition managed to hold on to power in Folba. But in Husavik, Anna Paulina Leo Olsen became the new mayor, and Davor Sørensen wasn't reelected. And we saw Johannes Ihoi Garizimum taking the mayoral seat in, well, another municipality.
A bit of a shakeup in some places, then. What about national politics? Anything major happening there?
Well, the big one was the national budget for 2025. The Figuralaget got approved. There was some back and forth over a proposed increase in government funding, but in the end, it didn't pass.
Interesting. Any key players in that debate?
Yeah, Janice Arana, he's a member of the parliament who actually voted against the budget.
So some dissenting voices there.
Mhm.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Faroes-Danish relations, always a fascinating dynamic. Anything noteworthy in January?
There was some talk about processing Danish citizenship applications, handling them directly in the Faroe Islands. But on the other hand, the chairman of the Grindemannafalagnum, that's the whaling association, well, he made a statement saying whalers feel betrayed by Denmark.
A bit of a contrast there, cooperation on one hand and this sense of disillusionment on the other.
Mm.
Anything else on that front?
Well, it seems the Danish government is trying to encourage Faroe's seafarers to stay working in the Danish maritime industry, so trying to retain that workforce.
Interesting. Always a bit of a push and pull, isn't there? Okay, let's talk about the economy. What was the financial situation like in January?
Petri Benki lowered interest rates by 0.15 percentage points.
Oh, really? What prompted that, do you think?
It was after the Danish National Bank made a similar move. But Petri Benki said, their reduction was a bit smaller because of the way interest rates had been trending the past couple of years in the Faroes. And then, just as another point, the national inflation rate for January was 0.8%.
So, a bit of a ripple effect from Denmark, but with some local adjustments. All right, let's move on to another key sector, fishing. Always vital for the Faroe Islands. What were the highlights in January?
The mackerel quota was announced. That's always big news. And all the ice fishing vessels were expected to land their catches within the week. The smaller fishing boats, the Utrar Arbitar, seemed to be having a good month.
That's great to hear. What about employment? Anything stand out in January?
Well, they were facing a shortage of deckhands on the merchant ships, so they actually came up with a new training program, a shorter one, to try and get people into those roles quicker.
Makes sense. Adapt to the need.
Yeah.
Any other interesting job postings in any industry that you came across?
I was looking through the listings, and there were quite a few across different sectors. For example, Tax AS, that's the tax authority. They were looking for a customs officer, a Talari. And Vaga Flogavin, the airport, they had an opening for security personnel, security staffs folk.
Okay, pretty standard.
And then there was this rather unique one, a sheep farmer, a Shogvalari in Gutuvik.
Now, that's what I call a quintessential Faroes job.
Yeah.
Okay, let's turn to community news. Anything noteworthy happening in January?
Well, sadly, there were 2 people hospitalized from carbon monoxide poisoning in their home up in the northern region. And separately, a man fell into a well, but luckily he was rescued.
Oh, dear. Those are frightening incidents. Anything else in terms of public safety?
The police in Klaksvik, they arrested someone for driving under the influence of drugs.
All right. What about education? Anything to report there?
Minam Skulenums Isuroi, that's one of the secondary schools, they got a new headmaster, Marit Gunnerstein Nielsen. And just as a side note, it's interesting that each secondary school in the Faroes has its own rules about attendance and academic performance.
Yeah, that is interesting.
And they all have digital learning procedures in place, in case travel gets disrupted, which happens from time to time.
Right. So what about cultural events? Anything that caught your eye in January?
There was a big 50th anniversary celebration for the church and mission house in Argir the Kirkju og Missionasusir. And Hoyvíkar Kirkja, that's another church, they had a Christmas Soul concert.
Sounds festive. Anything else on the cultural front?
Oh, and author Biskupur released a new book.
Great. Okay, any news specifically from Sandavagar?
They built a new kindergarten there.
Right.
And politically, the Listier party, they were, kind of disappointed that they didn't have more influence on the newly elected council.
So a mix of developments there. All right, let's dive into sports. Handball, what was happening in January?
The big news was the Faroe Islands national handball team joining the Rink Convention. It's this international agreement that deals with player transfers.
Ah, so a step onto the international stage. And
Yeah.
how did the national teams fare in January?
The women's team, they competed in the EHF Euro tournament. They didn't win any matches, but they put up a good fight and represented the Faroes well. There was even talk about handball potentially becoming a Winter Olympic sport.
Now, that would be something. What about the domestic leagues? Any highlights?
KIF, the men's team, they lost a tight match to Flair, which was a shame, could have helped them in the standings. But a player named Turia, I don't know which team, she scored 20 goals in a single game.
Wow, that's incredible. Anything else noteworthy in handball?
Oh, and two Faroes players, Elias Ellefsen, Askipagotu, and Horn Rasmussen. They were both doing really well in their respective top Swedish leagues.
Great to see them succeeding. Okay, let's switch gears. Chess. Anything happening there in January?
The National Chess League had to reschedule a few matches due to severe weather.
Ah, yes, the Faroes weather, always a factor. Speaking of which, what was the weather like in January?
Sadly, no white Christmas this year, but they were expecting some snow around New Year's.
Better late than never, I guess.
Yeah.
More importantly, what did the forecast look like for New Year's Eve? For the Rockets.
Oh, the forecast looked good for those. It really is amazing how much can happen in just a month, huh?
It is. From little local elections to like big international agreements for handball. It's like every part of life in the Faroe Islands was just like buzzing in January. Oh, speaking of sports, what was going on with football?
Well, HB Torshavn, they're one of the top Faroes football clubs. They announced the roster for their women's team for the new season.
Of course. That's always a big moment. Anything interesting happening outside of the Faroes?
Yeah, actually, Vikingur Reykjavik, that's the Icelandic football club, they got paired with Panathinaikos in the UEFA Conference League.
Oh, wow. A chance to see some high-level football. Were there any big player transfers during January?
There was one. HB Torshavn accepted a bid for Samuel Johansson Chikuri, but they didn't say which club it was.
Ah, the mystery. Okay, back to politics for a sec. Anything else major happening there in January?
Well, those discussions about handling Danish citizenship applications in the Faroe Islands, those were still ongoing. It's a pretty complicated issue, with all the history and politics involved.
You mentioned earlier that the chairman of the Grindamannafélagið said that Faroes whalers felt betrayed by Denmark. Could you explain that a little more?
Yeah, it seems like he was saying that that Denmark doesn't really understand or support the Faroes' perspective on whaling. It's this tension between keeping their traditions and dealing with all the international pressure.
It's a tough spot to be in, that's for sure.
Yeah.
It seems like the Faroe Islands are always at this point where they're trying to figure out their cultural identity and how it fits with Denmark and the rest of the world. Speaking of change, any other news on the weather front, besides those snowflakes you mentioned?
Oh, yeah. January in the Faroe Islands is always going to have unpredictable weather, right? It was like a mix, sometimes calm and sunny, sometimes windy and rainy.
Classic Faroe Islands.
Yeah.
Keeps you on your toes. That's part of what makes it so special.
Definitely. It reminds you of how powerful nature is and how we need to adapt.
That's so true. So, anything else we haven't talked about yet? Any other interesting news from January?
Well, there was this announcement, something like cunning Ruskinasovnan og uplading RT Hachala, information about waste collection and opening hours at Shala, I think. It was a good reminder to be careful about fire safety, especially around the holidays when there's more going on and things could be a fire hazard,
Yeah, makes sense, all those celebrations and stuff. Anything else that stood out to you?
Oh, Betri Banki.
Yeah.
The ones who lowered their interest rates, they explained their decision a bit more. They emphasized that the reason they made a smaller reduction than the Danish National Bank was because of those specific interest rate trends they'd seen in the Faroes over the past couple of years.
So they're really tailoring their approach to the Faroes economy then?
Yeah, exactly. They're making decisions based on what's happening in the Faroes, not just copying Denmark.
So maybe that's a sign of them wanting more economic independence.
It's definitely a possibility. It seems like they want to make their own economic policies, ones that really work for the Faroe Islands.
So we're seeing this theme of like self-determination pop up in different parts of Faroe's life, huh?
Yeah, it's not just about being independent, but about having their own voice and making their own future in the world.
And it sounds like January was a month of big changes for the Faroe Islands, wouldn't you say?
Definitely.
We'll be back soon with more from January 2024.
It's really striking, just how connected to the world the Faroe Islands are.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we see it everywhere, right?
Yeah.
From those international sports agreements to economic policies being like influenced by what's happening globally. For instance, the Faroe Islands national handball team joining that rink convention. What kind of impact do you think that could have on Faroe's athletes? And on the sport itself, I guess.
Oh, it's huge. I mean, it opens up so many doors now. Faroe's players can, like, compete and train internationally way more. They'll get to experience all sorts of different styles of play, different coaching, everything.
And that could really boost the level of handball in the Faroe Islands, right?
Exactly. It's a chance to take it to a whole new level. Maybe we'll even see some future international stars come out of it.
That'd be amazing.
Uh,
Okay, back to the Faroe Islands and Denmark for a minute. We were talking about whaling before and those concerns from the chairman of the Grindamannafélagdom. How do you see this relationship changing moving forward?
well, it's always hard to say for sure what the future holds, but it seems like the Faroe Islands are really trying to find their own place in the world. They want more control over certain things, but they still have that close bond with Denmark.
Yeah, it's definitely complicated. Do you think this push for more autonomy extends to their economy as well?
I think so. I mean, look at how Betri Banki adjusted their interest rates. They did it based on what was happening in the Faroes economy, not just because Denmark did it. That's a pretty clear sign, I think.
So could this be a move towards more economic independence?
Possibly. It definitely shows they want to create economic policies that are specifically designed for the Faroe Islands, policies that really work for them.
So it seems like this idea of self-determination is coming up in all different parts of Faroe society now.
Yeah, it's like they want to define themselves, have their own voice and shape their own future. And they're doing it all while being part of this global community.
And of course, their future is always going to be tied to those incredible natural forces, like the weather, right? We saw how unpredictable it can be.
Oh, absolutely. In the Faroe Islands, you have to be able to adapt. Resilience is key.
And it's that resilience, that sense of community that makes the Faroe Islands so special.
Exactly. It's this place where the old ways and the new ways come together, where people are connected to nature in this really deep way, thanks to those rugged landscapes, and where the people are proud, determined. They're forging their own path.
So well said. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into January 2024 in the Faroe Islands. We covered it all, didn't we?
Yeah.
Politics, the economy, community events, sports, even the weather.
It's just a glimpse, though. There's so much more to explore. So if anything we talked about piqued your interest, I encourage you to dig a little deeper, do some more research.
And who knows what the rest of the year will bring. But one thing's for sure, the Faroe Islands will always be this unique place, full of tradition and innovation, and of course, that incredible resilience. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thanks for listening.